Okay, hey there, Vue.Js event handling. There are several events that are triggered by JavaScript. These include the onClick, onmouseover, and many other. Okay, so as you can see, I have created an HTML5 skeleton with the link to the Bootstrap CSS as you can see here in the header, and also I've included the Vue development library. For production, you use a different link. This link is in the official website. I've created an instance, and I've created the scope. I've defined the scope of the instance as the div with an ID of app. As you can see, the hash symbol, then app, and in the HTML code, in the body, I've created a div element with an ID of app, and also created a button. So that's the button. When you click this button, nothing happens. Now I want to trigger some function. I will create in this data object. I will create a string, an integer, a string, okay, with the name cat1, and I'll assign a value of 0. So I'll create here paragraph tag, and then inside this paragraph tag I'll create two curly brackets, nested curly brackets, and I will assign the cat. So you can say it's 0. This value is printed as 0. Now we want to, when we click this button, we want to increment the value of cat by 1. So the easier, we will use the event attribute called be on. This is used to handle events in Vue. And then on click, when we click, we want something to happen. What does we want to happen? We want to increment the value of cat by 1. So this is the shorthand incremental property. If we run, if we click, it increments by 1. Okay, there's also another way of implementing this using you can implement this using a method. So we'll create another property in another object in the Vue instance called methods. These are defined names, methods, data, el. These are predefined names, so it can't be another name. It has to be methods. Sorry about it. You can't put your functions that predefined names. So I'll create I've created a method now. I will create another cat, another string element, and I'll name it property number. Okay, it's a number, and it's a number, it's a string. If you hover over the property, it gives you the property of a number, not a string. And if you hover here, it gives you a property of an object, and not a, as you can see, it gives you a property of a string. Okay, now I will copy this code and I will just paste it here. And then I'll put here to cut to. So when we click, instead of performing that operation here, we can create a function that when we click, it calls that function. In this case is add to cart. So when we click on this button, this function is triggered. This function is triggered and it does something. So we want, when this function is called, we want to increment the value of cat2 by 1. So when this function is called, it increments the value of cat2 by 1. So let's run. When we are calling that function, it increments the value of something. That's well, but okay, I think that's understandable. Also, another event now, we will use some data. I will in this data property I will add some data. Okay, let's close this. I will copy this. I save some data here, and then I'm copying inside this data property, the data object property. So okay, inside this data property, we have copied some array of objects. Now I want to loop through this array. We will use the list rendering as that we talked in the previous tutorial. So we will say p, and I will say v minus sign 4 colon v4 equal sign, equal sign, then double quotes v4 array item item 1 item 1 in list array this array of this data, this list of array here, the one we are using. It's an array of elements of objects. Now we'll say double quote, double curly brackets, and then we say item 1 dot array name. So that's the name of that object. It's just a loop through the element. So if we run, you can see it loops through this element. What do you want to do? We want to do anytime we hover, I can use this. I can replace this with a div tag. And then I can class of I'm putting some padding. These are bootstrap classes. So let's refresh. That does not look good. Text. So we want every time we hover on this book element car on this loop, it displays the images of these objects that we have hovering on. Now as you can see in this array, this object of array, this array of objects, it has a link to the images. So these images are in this folder called images. You can use any link that you have. Doesn't have to be these links. So now we'll create I will create an image tag inside this element. So anytime we hover, we will create another and create another property, v on mouse over. So we do this. Yeah. So when we over this element, we want I'm creating here an image source. And then that image source, I'm assigning an empty string. So every time we over this element, we want to assign the image source the link to the image. We want to assign this image source this URL, which is found in the data, in the array of objects, this link, so that it displays the image source. And then before we do that, we have to bind this source. We want to bind this source to the data in the Vue instance. So we are binding this to image PLC. But if it doesn't display, say no image, and then we can do away with it. Just displaying an image, not a multiple image. Now let's run. So okay, notice something wrong. This image, I have to remove it here. It is looping with the it's creating a loop. Now let's do separate. Now when we hover over the book, you can see the image of the book, you can see the image of a car, and you can see the image of a bicycle. It is like that. So when we hover, you can see the image of the bicycle, the image of a car, the image of a book, the image of a bicycle, the image of a car, a bicycle, book. So our code works. Now again, we, instead of implementing this code inside here, we can use a function. We can use a predefined, we can define a function. So for the moment, I will copy this code, and then I'll just paste here. Then I will comment this line of code, and then instead of implementing here, we will just, when it happens, we will call a function. Now we want to create a function. We create a function here and say hover method. You have to put comma before the next function. Now this function will have a parameter. Hover method. It will have a parameter. What kind of parameter will it have? It will have the parameter of the image, the link of the image, the current image. So, and then here we can just put param image. So what it does, it takes this dot image source, then it assigns the param image. So let's run this code. If you see it works. Now note that this time we are using a function. We are calling a function, as you can see. Every time we run the code, this function is being called. This function executes. On mouseover, we call this function, and this function carries as a parameter, which is the image URL, and then that image URL is being assigned this value in this here. You can say this image property is being assigned the parameter, as you can see, parameter. Okay, that's all. I hope you have understood. If you have any question, you can ask me.